The princess and Darya Alexandrovna insisted on strictly observing the established customs, so Levin was not to see his bride on the day of the wedding, and he dined at his hotel with 3 bachelors, who met in his room by chance. They were Sergey Ivanovitch, Katavasov, an old university friend, now professor of natural sciences, whom Levin had met on the street and brought home to dinner; Chirikov, his chauffeur, or best man, justice of the peace at Moscow, Levin's companion in bear hunting. The dinner was very lively. Sergey Ivanovitch was in the best of spirits, and greatly enjoyed Katavasov's originality. Katavasov, feeling that his originality was appreciated and understood, made a great display of it, and Chirikov added his share of gaiety to the conversation. "So, here is our friend, Konstantin Dmitrievitch," said Katavasov, with the slow speech of a professor accustomed to talk ex cathedra. "What a talented fellow he was! I speak of him in the past, for he no longer exists. He loved science when he left the university. He took an interest in humanity. Now he employs half his faculties in deceiving himself, and the other half in apologizing for the deception." "I never met a more confirmed enemy of marriage than you," said Sergey Ivanovitch. "No, I am not its enemy. I am a friend of the distribution of labor. People who cannot do anything ought to be the ones to propagate the race. All the rest should devote themselves to their intellectual development and welfare. That is my opinion. I know a great many people are inclined to confound these two, but I am not of the number." "How delighted I should be to hear that you were in love!" exclaimed Levin. "Pray invite me to your wedding." "But I am already in love." "Yes, with some cuttlefish, you know," said Levin, turning to his brother. "Mikhail Semyonitch has written a work on the nutrition, and—" "Now I beg of you not to confuse matters. It is of no consequence what I have written, but it is a fact that I love a cuttlefish." "That need not prevent your loving a wife." "No, but my wife would object to my loving the cuttlefish." "Why so?" "You will see how it will be. Now you love your farming, hunting. Well, just wait a while." "I met Arkhip today," said Chirikov. "He says that there are quantities of elk at Prudnoye, and 2 bears." "Well, you must hunt them without me." "You see how it is," said Sergey Ivanovitch. "You may as well say good bye to bear hunting. Your wife won't allow it." Levin smiled. The idea that his wife would object to his hunting seemed so delightful that he was ready to renounce the pleasure of ever meeting a bear again. "However, I am sorry to hunt those 2 bears without you," said Chirikov. "Do you remember the last time at Kapolovo? The hunting was marvelous." Levin did not care to spoil his friend's illusion that life would be worth nothing without hunting, and so he made no reply. "The custom of saying good bye to one's bachelor life is not without meaning," said Sergey Ivanovitch. "However happy one may be, a man regrets his liberty. Confess that, like Gogolevsky, when he was engaged, you feel like jumping out of the window." "Certainly, but he won't confess it," said Katavasov with a loud laugh. "The window is open. Come now, let us go to Tver. We might find one bear in her lair. Indeed, we still have time to catch the 5 o'clock train," said Chirikov, smiling. "Hear them laugh." "Well, upon my honor," replied Levin, smiling, too, "I cannot discover the least trace of regret in my soul for my lost liberty." "Yes, your soul is in such a chaos now that you cannot find anything in it," said Katavasov. "Wait till it becomes calmer, then you will see." "No, if I felt in the least degree that there was nothing beyond my feeling of—" he did not like to speak of love before Katavasov, "of happiness, I should regret my lost freedom. But it is not so at all. I am even delighted at my loss of freedom." "You are a hopeless case," exclaimed Katavasov. "However, let us drink to his recovery, or let us at least hope for him that 1% of his illusions may be accomplished. And even that would be such happiness as was never known on this earth." Shortly after dinner the guests separated to dress for the wedding. When he was left alone, and had a chance to think over the conversation of these bachelors, Levin again asked himself whether he really regretted the liberty of which his friends had just been talking, and he smiled at the idea. Liberty! Why liberty? Happiness for me consists in loving, in thinking her thoughts, in wishing her wishes, without any liberty. That is happiness. But can I know her thoughts, her wishes, her feelings? Whispered some voice. The smile disappeared from his face, and he fell into a deep study. And suddenly a strange feeling came over him. Fear and doubt came over him. Doubt about everything. Suppose she does not love me? What if she is marrying me merely for the sake of being married? What if she herself does not know what she is doing? He asked himself. Will she, perhaps, see her mistake and discover, after we are married, that she does not love me, and that she never can love me? And strange, even painful thoughts about Kitty came to his mind. He began to be violently jealous of Vronsky, just as he had been the year before. There came up before him, like the memory of yesterday, that evening when he had seen them together, and he suspected her of not having confessed everything to him. He quickly sprang up. No, he said in despair, I cannot let this remain so. I will go and find her. I will talk with her, and say to her again for the last time, we are free. Is it not better to stop just where we are? Anything is better than lifelong unhappiness, shame, distrust. And with despair in his heart, full of hatred toward all mankind, toward himself and Kitty, he left the hotel and hastened to her house. He found her in one of the rear rooms sitting on a large chest, busy with her maid, looking over dresses of all colors, spread out over the backs of the chairs and on the floor. Ah! she exclaimed, beaming with joy at seeing him. What brings thee? What brings you? Even up to this last day she sometimes said "tui," sometimes "vous." I was not expecting you. I'm just disposing of my maiden wardrobe. Ah, that is good, he replied, frowning at the maid. Run away, Dunyasha. I will call you, said Kitty. And as soon as she had gone, she asked, using the second person of the pronoun, What is the matter with thee? This time resolutely. She remarked her lover's strange, excited, and gloomy face, and was seized with fear. Kitty, I am in torture, and I cannot suffer alone, he said to her with despair in his voice, stopping in front of her and looking into her eyes in a beseeching way. He saw at once by her face, so sincere and loving, that nothing whatever would result from his determination, yet he felt an urgent need of being reassured from her own lips. I came to tell you that it is not yet too late, that everything can even now be taken back. What? I do not understand. What is the matter with thee? I am, as I have said and thought 1,000 times before, I am not worthy of you. You once could not consent to marry me. Think of it. Perhaps you are mistaken now. Think of it well. You cannot love me if... It is better to acknowledge it, he continued without looking at her. I shall be miserable, but no matter. Let people say what they please. Anything is better than unhappiness. But anything is better now, while there is yet time. I do not understand you, she replied, frightened. You mean you want to take back your word? Break off our... Yes, if you do not love me. You must be insane, she exclaimed, red with vexation. But the sight of Levin's piteous face arrested her anger, and pushing the frocks from one of the chairs, she sat down near him. What are you thinking of? Tell me all. I think that you cannot love me. Why should you love me? Bosez-moi, what can I do? Said she, and she burst into tears. Oh, what have I done? He cried instantly, and throwing himself on his knees, he covered her hands with kisses. When the princess came into the room 5 minutes later, she found them completely reconciled. Kitty had not only convinced him of her love, but in answer to his question, she had explained to him why she loved him. She said that she loved him because she understood him perfectly, because she knew that he could love, and that all he loved was good and beautiful. Levin found the explanation perfectly satisfactory. When the princes came in they were sitting side by side on the big chest, looking over the frocks and discussing their fate. Kitty wanted to give Dunyasha the brown frock that she wore the day Levin proposed to her, and he insisted that it should not be given to anyone, and that Dunyasha should have the blue frock. "But don't you see that she is a brunette, and the blue frock will not be becoming to her? I have thought it all over." When she learned why Levin was there, the princess was half vexed at him, and sent him home to make his own toilet, and leave Kitty in peace, as Charles was going to dress Kitty's hair. "She is quite excited enough," said she. "She has eaten nothing for days, and is losing all her beauty. And here you come to trouble her with your foolishness. Come, go away now, my dear." Levin went back to the hotel, guilty and ashamed, but reassured. His brother, Darya Alexandrovna, and Stepan Arkadyevitch, in full dress, were already waiting with holy images to bless him. There was no time to be lost. Darya Alexandrovna had to go home again to get her son perfumed and curled for the occasion. The child was to carry the sacred image before the bride. The one carriage must be sent for the chauffeur or best man, while another was to come to the hotel for Sergey Ivanovitch. This day was full of complications. One thing was certain, that no delay was possible, for it was already 6:30. The ceremony of the benediction was anything but solemn. Stepan Arkadyevitch assumed a comically grave attitude beside his wife, raised the sacred image, and obliged Levin to kneel before it, while he blessed him with an affectionate and wicked smile. At last he kissed him 3 times, and Darya Alexandrovna did the same very hastily, for she was in a great hurry to get away, and in great perplexity about the carriage arrangements. "Well, this is what we will do. You go for him in our carriage, and perhaps Sergey Ivanovitch will be so good as to come immediately, and to send back his." "Certainly, with pleasure." "We will come back together. Has the luggage been sent?" asked Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Yes," replied Levin, and he called Kuzma to help him dress. A throng of people, principally women, surrounded the church, brilliantly lighted for the wedding. Those who could not get inside were pushing up around the windows and elbowing one another as they strove to look through the gratings. Already more than 20 carriages stood in a line in the street, under the supervision of policemen. A police officer stood at the entrance in brilliant uniform, unmindful of the cold. Carriages kept driving up and departing. Now ladies in full dress, holding up their trains, now men taking off their hats or kepis. In the church itself both chandeliers and all the candles before the images were already burning. The golden gleam on the red background of the iconostas, and the gilded chasings of the icons, and the silver of the candelabra and of the censers, and the flaggings of the floor, and the tapestries and the banners suspended in the choir and the steps of the pulpit, and the old dingy missals, and the priestly robes, were all flooded with lights. On the right-hand side of the warm church, amid the brave array of dress coats, uniforms, and white neckties, and satin, silk, and velvet robes, of coiffures, flowers, and bare necks and arms, and long gloves, there was a constant flow of restrained but lively conversation, which echoed strangely beneath the high, vaulted roof. Whenever the door opened with a plaintive creak, the murmur ceased, and everyone turned around, hoping at last to see the bridal pair. But the door had already opened more than 10 times, and each time it proved to be some belated guest, or guests, admitted among the number of the friends on the right, or some spectator who had been clever enough to deceive or elude the police officer, and sat down among the strangers on the left. The friends and strangers had passed through every phase of waiting. At first they supposed that the bride and bridegroom would be there any minute, and did not attach any importance to the delay. Then they began to look around at the door more and more frequently, wondering what could have happened. At last the delay began to be awkward, and the relatives and invited guests tried to assume an air of indifference, as if they were absorbed in their conversation. The archdeacon, as if to let people know that his time was precious, every now and then gave an impatient cough, which made the windows rattle. In the choir the singers, tired of waiting, could be heard, now trying their voices, and now blowing their noses. The priest kept sending, now a sacristan, now a deacon, to find out if the bridegroom was coming, and appeared himself more and more frequently at the side doors in his lilac cassock with its embroidered sash. Finally a lady looked at her watch and said to the one sitting next to her, "This is very strange," and immediately all the invited guests began to express their surprise and discontent aloud. One of the Schäfers, or best men, went to see what had happened. During all this time Kitty, in her white dress, long veil, and wreath of orange blossoms, was standing in the hall of the Shtcherbatsky mansion with her sister, Madame Lvova, and her nuptial godmother, looking out of the window, and had been waiting for half an hour for the Schäfer to announce the bridegroom's arrival at the church. Levin, meanwhile, in black trousers, but without either coat or waistcoat, was walking up and down his room at the hotel, opening the door every minute to look out into the corridor. But in the corridor nothing like what he wanted was to be seen, and, wringing his hands in despair, he would pour forth his complaints to Stepan Arkadyevitch, who was calmly smoking. "Did you ever see a man in such a horribly absurd situation?" "Yes, abominable," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, with his tranquil smile. "But be calm, they will have it here very soon." "No, hang it," said Levin, with restrained fury. "All these idiotic open waistcoats! Absolutely useless," he added, looking at his tumbled shirt bosom. "And what if my trunks have already gone to the railway station?" he exclaimed in despair. "Then you can wear mine." "I might have done that in the first place." "Don't be ridiculous. Wait, it is sure to come all right." The fact was that when Levin began to dress, Kuzma, his old servant, was supposed to have taken out his dress coat, his waistcoat, and all that was necessary. "But the shirt!" cried Levin. "You have your shirt on," replied Kuzma, with an innocent smile. Kuzma had not thought to provide a clean shirt, and having received his orders to pack everything up and take them to the Shtcherbatskys' house, from which the young couple was to start away that same evening, he had done so, leaving out only his dress suit. The one that Levin had worn all day was tumbled and unfit to wear with his open waistcoat. It would take too long to send to the Shtcherbatskys. They sent out to buy one. The lackey returned empty-handed. Everything was shut up. It was Sunday. A shirt was brought from Stepan Arkadyevitch's house. It was ridiculously broad and short. At last, in despair, he had to send to the Shtcherbatskys to have his trunks opened. So, while the people were waiting in the church, the unfortunate groom, like a wild beast in a cage, was ramping with despair up and down his room, looking out into the corridor, and in his horror and despair imagining what Kitty might be thinking all this time. Finally the guilty Kuzma rushed into the room, all out of breath, with the shirt in his hand. "I got there just in time, as they were carrying off the trunks," he exclaimed. In 3 minutes Levin rushed through the corridor, without daring to look at his watch, for fear of increasing his agony of mind. "You can't change anything," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, with a smile, following leisurely. "I told you it would come out all right." "Here they come. There he is. Which one? Is it the youngest? Just look at her. Poor little Matushka, more dead than alive," was murmured through the crowd, as Levin, having met the bride at the entrance, came into the church with her. Stepan Arkadyevitch told his wife the reason of the delay, and a smile passed over the congregation as it was whispered about. Levin neither saw any one nor anything, but kept his eyes fixed on his bride. Everyone said that she had grown very homely during these last days, and certainly she did not look so pretty under her bridal wreath as usual, but such was not Levin's opinion. He looked at her high coiffure, with the long white veil attached, and white flowers, at her high plaited collar encircling her slender neck in a peculiarly maidenly fashion, and just showing it a little in front, her remarkably graceful figure, and she seemed more beautiful to him than ever. But it was not because the flowers, or the veil, or her Paris gown added anything to her beauty, but because of the expression of her lovely face, her eyes, her lips, with their innocent sincerity, preserved in spite of all this adornment. "I was beginning to think you had made up your mind to run away," she said to him with a smile. "What happened to me was so absurd that I am ashamed to tell you about it," he replied, reddening, and he was compelled to turn to Sergey Ivanovitch, who came up at that moment. "The tale of the shirt is a good one," said Sergey Ivanovitch, throwing back his head with a laugh. "Yes, yes," replied Levin, without understanding a word which had been said. "Well, Kostya, now is the time to make a serious decision," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, pretending to look greatly scared. "The question is a grave one, and you must appreciate its full importance. I have been asked whether the candles shall be new ones, or those that have been partially burned. The difference is 10 rubles," he added, pursing his lips in a smile. "I have decided about it, but I am afraid that you will not approve of it." Levin knew that there was some joke about it, but he could not smile. "What will you decide on? New ones or old ones? That is the question." Yes, new ones." "Well, I am very glad. The question is settled," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Oh, how little importance a man is at such a time as this," he murmured to Zherkov, while Levin drew near to his bride, after looking at her in a bewildered way. "Notice, Kitty, who first sets foot on the carpet," said the Countess Nordston, stepping up to her. "You look your best," she said, addressing Levin. "Are you frightened?" asked Marya Dmitrievna, an old aunt. "You aren't cold, are you? You look pale. Bend forward a moment," said Madame Lvova, raising her beautiful round arms to repair some disarrangement of her sister's flowers. Dolly came up and tried to say something, but she could not speak, and burst into tears and laughed unnaturally. Kitty looked at those around her as absent-mindedly as Levin. During this time the officiating clergymen had put on their sacerdotal robes, and the priest, accompanied by the deacon, came to the lectern placed at the entrance of the sacred doors. The priest addressed a few words to Levin, but Levin failed to understand what he said. "Take the bride's hand and go forward," whispered his best man to him. For a long time he was unable to make out what was expected of him. For a long time they tried to coach him, and were ready to give it up, because he did the opposite of what he was told. Finally, he comprehended that he was to take Kitty's right hand with his right hand, without changing his position. When at last he took the bride by her hand in the proper way, the priest advanced a few steps and stopped in front of the lectern. The relatives and invited guests followed the young couple with a murmur of voices and a rustling of trains. Someone stooped down to arrange the bride's train. In the church, a silence so profound reigned that the drops of wax could be heard falling from the candles. The old priest in a calotte, his white hair shining like silver, drawn back behind his ears, drew forth his wrinkled hands from beneath his heavy silver chasuble, ornamented with a cross of gold, approached the lectern, and turned over the leaves of the missal. Stepan Arkadyevitch came softly and spoke in his ear, and made a sign to Levin, and then stepped back. The priest lighted 2 candles decorated with flowers, and, holding them slanting in his left hand, so that the wax slowly fell from them, turned toward the young couple. It was the same old man who had heard Levin's confession. He looked at the bride and bridegroom, out of his sad, weary eyes, and then, with a sigh, blessed Levin with his right hand, then, with especial tenderness, placed his fingers on Kitty's bended head, gave them the candles, and taking the censer, moved quietly away. "Is this all real?" thought Levin, and he glanced at his bride. He looked down somewhat from above on her profile, and by the motion of her lips and her eyebrows he knew that she felt his look. She did not raise her head, but the high plaited collar which reached to her little pink ear trembled a little. He saw that she was stifling a sigh, and her hand imprisoned in its long glove trembled as it held the candle. The whole affair of the shirt, his late arrival, his conversation with his relatives and friends, their displeasure, his ridiculous position, everything at once vanished from his memory, and he was conscious of a mixed feeling of terror and joy. The archdeacon, a tall, handsome man, his hair curling all around his head and wearing a stikar, or surplice, of silver cloth, came briskly forward, and with the customary gesture raised his stole with 2 fingers and stopped before the priest. "Bless us, O Lord!" Slowly, one after the other, rocking the atmosphere into billows of sound, echoed the solemn syllables. "May the Lord bless you now and through all ages," replied the old priest, in a sweet and musical voice, still turning over the leaves. And the response, chanted by the invisible choir, filled the church to the very roof of the vault with a deep, full sound, which increased, then ceased for a moment, and softly died away. They prayed as usual for the eternal repose and welfare of their souls, for the synod and the emperor, and then for the servants of God, Konstantin and Yekaterina, that day about to be wed. Let us pray the Lord to send them his love, his peace, and his aid, the whole church seemed to say in the voice of the archdeacon. Levin listened to these words and was impressed by them. How did they know that aid was exactly what I need? Yes, aid. What can I know? What can I do without aid? He thought, recalling his recent doubts and fears. When the deacon had ended the liturgy, the priest, with a book in his hand, turned toward the bridal couple. O eternal God, who unitest by an indissoluble bond those who are separate, he read, in a strong melodious voice. Thou who didst bless Isaac and Rebekah, and showest thy mercy to their descendants. Bless also these thy servants, Konstantin and Yekaterina, and pour forth thy benefits upon them. Because thou art a merciful and beneficent God, we offer thee the glory, to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Ghost, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. Amen, again chanted the invisible choir. Who unitest by an indissoluble bond those who are separate. How those profound words respond to what one feels at such a time. Does she understand it as I do? Thought Levin. And looking down, he gazed into her eyes. From the expression of Kitty's face he concluded that she did feel it as he did, but he was mistaken. She scarcely comprehended the words of the service, and during the time of the espousal did not even hear them. She could not hear them or comprehend them, so powerful was the single feeling which filled her heart and kept increasing all the time. This feeling was one of delight at the perfect fulfillment of what had been taking place in her heart during the past month and a half, and during those 6 weeks had made her happy and restless by turns. From that day when, in her cinnamon-colored gown, in the hall of their house on the Arbatsky, she had silently approached Levin to give herself wholly to him, from that day, from that moment, she felt a complete rupture had been made with all her past life, and another existence, new and unknown, without, however, changing her outward life, had begun. These 6 weeks had been at once a very happy and a very trying time. Her whole life, her hopes and desires, were all concentrated on this man, whom she did not even yet fully understand, to whom she was united by a sentiment which she understood still less, and which attracted her and repelled her by turns, and at the same time she had gone on living in the conditions of her former life. Living in this old life, she was horrified at herself, at her complete and invincible indifference toward her whole past, to things, to habits, even to her relatives, whom she loved, and who loved her, her mother, who was pained by her indifference, and her gentle father, whom she had loved more than anyone else in the world. At one moment she was horrified at this indifference, at the next she was filled with joy at that which had brought her to such a feeling. She could not imagine or desire anything except life with this man. But this new life had not yet begun, and she could form no definite idea of it. It was only an expectation, a fear and joy of something new and unknown. And now this expectation, as well as her remorse for not regretting the past, were at an end, and the new life was beginning. This new and unknown future could not fail to be alarming. But whether it was alarming or not, it was only the fulfillment of what had taken place in her soul 6 weeks before, only the sanctification of what had been taking place in her soul for a long time. The priest, turning to the lectern again, with difficulty took off Kitty's little ring and passed it as far as the first joint of Levin's finger. I unite thee, Konstantin, servant of God, to Yekaterina, servant of God. And he repeated the same formula in placing a large ring on Kitty's delicate little rosy finger, pathetic in its weakness. The bridal pair tried to understand what was expected of them, but each time made a mistake, and the priest corrected them in a low voice. At last the priest, blessing them with his fingers, again gave Kitty the large ring and Levin the small one, and again they got confused, and twice passed the rings from hand to hand, failing to interchange them as they should have done. Dolly Chirikov and Stepan Arkadyevitch stepped out to assist them in their difficulty. The people around them smiled and whispered. But the tenderly solemn expression on the faces of the young couple did not change. On the contrary, even when they were blundering with the rings, they looked more serious and solemn than before, and the smile on Stepan Arkadyevitch's face died away, as he whispered to them that they were to put on their own rings. It seemed to him that a smile might be offensive to them. O thou who, from the beginning of the world, hast created man, male and female, continued the priest, after the ceremony of the rings, and hast given to man the woman to be his aid and delight. Therefore, O thou, our Lord God, who hast given thy blessing to thy chosen, to thy servants, our fathers, to thine inheritance, do thou bless thy servants Constantine and Karenina, and confirm their nuptials in faith and concord and truth and love. Levin's breast heaved. Disobedient tears filled his eyes. He kept feeling more and more that all his thoughts on marriage, his visions of how he should dispose his life, had hitherto been infantile, and that there was something that had never been comprehensible to him. And now he understood its meaning less than ever, although he was now wholly in its power. All Moscow, all the relatives and acquaintances, were at the church, and during the time of the marriage service, in the brilliant light that flooded the church, in that throng of handsomely dressed women and girls, and of men in white neckties, in swallow-tails, or in uniform, there was a decorously subdued conversation, especially among the men, for the women were absorbed in observing all the details of a ceremony which is always so full of interest for them. A little group of friends surrounded the bride, and among them were her two sisters, Dolly and the beautiful Madame Lvova, just returned from abroad. "Why is Mary in lilac at a wedding? It is almost mourning," said Madame Vronsky. "With her complexion it is her only salvation," replied Madame de Butsky. "But I wonder why they had the ceremony in the evening. That savors of the merchant." "It is pleasanter. I too was married in the evening," said Madame Vronsky, sighing and recalling how beautiful she had been on that day, and how ridiculously in love with her husband had been, and how it was all so different now. "They say that those who have been best men more than 10 times never marry. I tried to make myself proof against marriage in this way, but the place was taken," said Count Zineavin to the handsome young Princess Tsaritskaya, who had designs on him. A smile was her only reply. She was looking at Kitty, and thinking how and when she would stand with Count Zineavin in Kitty's place, and how she would then remind him of the joke that he had made. Shtcherbatsky confided to the old Frylina Nikolaevna his intention to place the crown on Kitty's headdress to bring her good luck. "There's no need of wearing a headdress," replied Frylina Nikolaevna, who had long ago decided that if the old widower, whom she was setting her cap for, should offer himself, she would be married very simply. "I don't like this display." Sergey Ivanovitch, who was talking with Darya Dmitrievna, jestingly declared that the fashion of wedding tours was becoming widespread because young couples were always rather bashful. "Your brother must be very proud of his choice. She is charming. You must envy him." "The time has gone by for that, Darya Dmitrievna," he replied, and an unexpected expression of sadness overspread his face. Stepan Arkadyevitch was telling his sister-in-law his pun on divorce. "Somebody ought to arrange her wreath," replied the latter, without listening. "What a pity that she has grown so ugly," said the Countess Nordstone to Madame Lvova. "After all, he isn't worth her little finger, is he?" "I don't agree with you. I am very much pleased with him, and not only because he is going to be my beau-frère," replied Madame Lvova. "How well he appears! It is so difficult to appear well at such a time, and not to be absurd. He is neither ridiculous nor stiff. One feels that he is touched." "Did you expect this marriage?" "Almost. He has always been in love with her." "Well, we shall see which will be the first to step on the carpet. I've advised Kitty to look out for that." "That makes no difference," replied Madame Lvova. "In our family we are all submissive wives. But I have taken pains to keep mine under the thumb. How is it with you, Dolly?" Dolly was standing near them and heard them, but she did not reply. She was affected. Tears filled her eyes, and she could not have uttered a word without crying. She was glad for Kitty and Levin. She was thinking of her own wedding, and as she glanced at the brilliant Stepan Arkadyevitch, she forgot the real state of things, and only remembered his first innocent love. She was thinking, too, of other women, her relatives and acquaintances, whom she remembered at this important and solemn hour of their lives, how they, like Kitty, stood under the crown, how they renounced the past with joy, and began a mysterious future, with hope and fear in their hearts. Among the number she recalled her dear Anna, the details of whose approaching divorce she had just heard. She had seen her enveloped in a white veil, as pure as Kitty, with her wreath of orange blossoms. And now? "It is terribly strange," she whispered. The sisters and friends were not the only ones to follow with interest the minutest details of the ceremony. There were women among the strangers looking on who held their breath, for fear of losing a single movement of the bride or bridegroom, and who replied absent-mindedly to the jokes or idle remarks of the men, often not even hearing them. "Why is she so troubled? Are they marrying her against her will?" "Against her will? To such a handsome man? Is he a prince?" "Is that her sister in white satin? There, just hear the deacon howl. Let her fear her husband." "Are the singers from Chudov?" "No, from the synod. I've asked the servant about it. He says that her husband is going to take her away to his estate. Awfully rich, they say. That is why she is marrying him." "They make a handsome pair." "And you pretend to say, Marya Vassilyevna, that they don't wear crinolines any longer. Just look at that one in the puce-colored dress. You would say she was an ambassador's wife by the way she is dressed. Do you see now? What a sweet little creature the bride is, like a lamb for the slaughter. You may say what you please. I can't help pitying her." Such were the remarks of the spectators who had succeeded in getting past the door of the church. As the service of espousal was coming to an end, one of the officiating priests spread a piece of rose-colored silk in front of the lectern, in the center of the church. The choir chanted an artistic and complicated psalm, in which the tenor and bass sang responsively, and the priest, turning to the young couple, attracted their attention to the piece of rose-colored fabric. They were both familiar with the superstition that whichever one of the bridal couple first sets foot on the carpet becomes the real head of the family, but neither Kitty nor Levin remembered anything about it after they had gone a few steps. They did not hear the remarks exchanged about them, or the discussions between those who thought that he was the first and those who were sure that they touched it simultaneously. After the customary questions as to their willingness to enter into the bonds of matrimony, and would they plight their mutual troth, and their answers, which sounded strangely loud to their own ears, a new office began. Kitty listened to the words of the prayers and tried to understand them, but she could not. The farther the ceremony proceeded, the more her heart overflowed with triumphant joy, which prevented her from fixing her attention. They prayed to God that the pair might have the gift of chastity, and might rejoice in the sight of many sons and daughters. They recalled how God had made the first woman from Adam's side, that the woman must leave father and mother and cling to her husband, and the twain shall be one flesh, and that this is a great miracle. They prayed God to give them fecundity and prosperity, as he had blessed Isaac and Rebekah, Joseph, Moses, and Sephora, and to let them see their children to the third and fourth generation. "All this is lovely," thought Kitty, as she heard these words. "All this is just as it should be," and a smile of happiness, which was reflected on the faces of all who saw her, shone on her fair, lovely face. "Put it entirely on," were the words heard in every part of the church, as the priest brought forward the crowns, and Shtcherbatsky, in his 3-buttoned gloves, tremblingly held the wreath high above Kitty's head. "Put it on," whispered the latter, smiling. Levin turned round and was struck by the radiant joy which filled her face, and the same feeling, in spite of himself, took possession of him. He felt, like her, happy and serene. They listened with joy in their hearts to the reading of the epistle, and the archdeacon's voice echoing the last verse, fully appreciated by the strangers who were impatiently waiting for it. Joyfully they drank the warm red wine and water from the flat cup, and they felt still more joyful when the priest, throwing back his chasuble, led them around the lectern, holding both their hands in his, while the bass sang, at the top of his voice, Isayi Luki. Shtcherbatsky and Chirikov, carrying the crowns, smiling and constantly treading on the bride's train, now straggled behind, now bumped into the crowned couple, as the priest paused in front of the relics. The gleam of joy on Kitty's face seemed to be communicated to all present. Levin was sure that the deacon and the priest fell under its influence as well as himself. When the crowns had been taken from their heads, the priest read the last prayers and congratulated the young couple. Levin looked at Kitty and thought he had never seen her so beautiful. It was the beauty of that new radiance of happiness which transformed her. He wanted to say something to her, but did not know whether the ceremony was yet over or not. The priest relieved him from his uncertainty, and said gently to him, with a kindly smile, "Kiss your wife, and you kiss your husband," and he took the candles. Levin, with circumspection, kissed his wife's smiling lips, gave her his arm, and went out of the church with a new and strange feeling of being suddenly very near to her. He had not believed, he could not believe, that all this was reality. Nor until their astonished and timid eyes met did he believe it, because he felt that they were indeed one. That same evening, after the supper, the young couple started for the country. Vronsky and Anna had been traveling together in Europe for 3 months. They had visited Venice, Rome, Naples, and now they were just arrived at a small Italian city where they intended to make a considerable stay. At the hotel the head butler, a regular Adonis of a man, who wore his thick pomaded hair parted behind from the neck, and a dress coat with a wide expanse of white shirt front and watch charms over his rotund belly, was standing with his hands thrust into his pockets, scornfully blinking his eyes, and giving curt answers to a gentleman who had entered the hotel. Hearing steps on the other side of the entrance, the head butler turned around, and, seeing the Russian count, who rented his most expensive apartments, he respectfully drew his hands out of his pockets, and, with a low bow, informed the count that a messenger had come to say that the palazzo was at his service. The agent was ready to sign the agreement. "Ah, I am very glad," said Vronsky. "Is Madame at home?" "She has been out, but she has returned," replied the butler. Vronsky took off his wide-brimmed soft hat, and wiped his heated forehead with his handkerchief, and smoothed his hair, which was so arranged as to hide his bald spot. Then, casting a hasty glance at the stranger, who had stopped and was looking at him earnestly, he started to go. "This gentleman is a Russian, and was inquiring for you," said the head butler. With a mingled feeling of vexation because he never could get away from acquaintances, and of pleasure at the idea of any distraction from his monotonous existence, Vronsky once more looked at the gentleman, who had started to go and then stopped, and at one and the same time their eyes met. "Golenishev! Vronsky!" It was indeed Golenishev, one of Vronsky's schoolmates at the Corps of Pages. He had belonged to the Liberal party in the Corps, and, after his graduation, he had taken a civil rank, and had not served. The comrades had entirely drifted apart since their graduation, and had met only once. At that meeting Vronsky had perceived that Golenishev looked down from the lofty heights of his chosen liberal profession on Vronsky's profession and career. Consequently, Vronsky at that meeting with Golenishev had given him that cold and haughty reception with which it was his fashion to treat people, as much as to say, "You may like or dislike my manner of life, but it is absolutely of no consequence to me, and you must respect me if you want to know me." Golenishev had been scornfully indifferent to Vronsky's manner. That meeting, it would seem, should have driven them still further apart. Yet now, at the sight of each other, they each uttered a cry of delight. Vronsky had never realized how glad he would be to see Golenishev, but the fact was that he did not know how bored he was. He forgot the unpleasant impression of their previous meeting, and with magnificent pleasure extended his hand to his old comrade. And likewise a look of satisfaction succeeded the troubled expression on Golenishev's face. "How glad I am to see you," said Vronsky, with a friendly smile which showed his handsome white teeth. "I heard the name Vronsky, but which, I did not know. I'm very, very glad. But come in. Well, what are you doing?" "Oh, I have been living here more than a year, working." "Ah," said Vronsky, with interest. "But come in." And, according to the habit of Russians, Instead of saying in Russian what he did not wish to be understood by servants, he said in French, "Do you know Madame Karenina? We have been traveling together. I was just going to her room." And while he was speaking, he studied Golenishtchev's face. "Ah, I did not know," remarked Golenishtchev carelessly, but he did know. "Have you been here very long?" "I? Oh, this is the 4th day," replied Vronsky, continuing to study his companion. "Yes, he is a gentleman and looks upon things in the right light," he said to himself, giving a favorable interpretation to Golenishtchev's way of turning the conversation. "He can be presented to Anna. His views are all right." Vronsky, during this 3 months which he had been spending with Anna abroad, had felt every time that he met with new acquaintances a hesitation as to the manner in which they would look on his relations with Anna, and for the most part the men had looked on them "in the right light." If he or they had been asked what they meant by the expression "in the right light," they would have found it hard to tell. In reality, those that according to Vronsky looked on it "in the right light" had never looked on it at all, but as a general thing contented themselves with a wise discretion, not asking questions or making allusions, and behaved altogether as well-bred people behave when presented with delicate and complex questions such as surround life on all sides. They pretended that they fully appreciated the meaning and significance of the situation, recognized and even approved of it, but considered it ill-judged and superfluous to explain it. Vronsky instantly saw that Golenishtchev was one of those discreet people, and was therefore glad to meet him. In fact, Golenishtchev behaved toward Madame Karenina when he was introduced to her in exactly the manner that Vronsky demanded. It evidently cost him no effort to avoid all words that would lead to any awkwardness. He had never seen Anna before, and was delighted with her beauty, and still more with the perfect simplicity with which she accepted the situation. She flushed when she saw Vronsky come in with Golenishtchev, and this infantile color which spread over her frank and lovely face pleased him immensely. But he was delighted because from the very first, as if purposefully, even in the presence of a stranger, which might have caused restraint, she called Vronsky Alexey, and told how they had just rented a house which the people called a palazzo, and how she was going to occupy it with him. The simple and straightforward facing of their situation was delightful to Golenishtchev. Perceiving Anna's happy and vivacious manner, knowing Alexey Alexandrovitch and Vronsky, it seemed to him that he thoroughly understood her. It seemed to him that he understood what she herself did not understand, how she could desert her unhappy husband and her son, and lose her good repute, and still feel animated, gay, and happy. "It is in the guide-book," said Golenishtchev, speaking of the palazzo, which Vronsky called by name. "There is a superb Tintoretto there, in his latest manner." "Do you know that? It is splendid weather. Let's go over and look at it again," said Vronsky, addressing Anna. "I should like to very much. I will go and put on my hat. Did you say it was hot?" said she, pausing at the door and looking back to Vronsky, and again the bright color came into her face. Vronsky saw by her look that she was uncertain how he wished to treat Golenishtchev, and that she was afraid that her behavior might not be what he desired. He looked at her long and tenderly. Then he replied, "No, not very." And it seemed to her that she comprehended him perfectly, and especially that he was satisfied with her, and, replying with a smile, she went out with a quick and graceful motion. The friends looked at each other, and there came into the faces of both an expression of embarrassment, as if Golenishtchev, admiring her, wished to make some complimentary remark, and had not the courage, while Vronsky both wished and feared to hear it. "Well, then," Vronsky began, so that some conversation might be started. "So you are settled here? Are you still interested in the same pursuits?" he asked, remembering that he had been told that Golenishtchev was writing something. "Yes, I have been writing the second part of the 'Two Origins,'" replied Golenishtchev, kindling with delight at the question. "That is, to be more exact, I am not writing yet, but have been collecting and preparing my materials. It will be far more extended, and will touch on almost all questions. At home, in Russia, they can't understand that we are successors of Byzantium." And he began a long and vehement explanation. Vronsky at first felt awkward because he did not know about the first part of the 'Two Origins,' about which the author spoke as if it were something well known. But afterward, as Golenishtchev began to develop his thought, and Vronsky saw what he meant, then, even though he did not know about the two origins, he listened not without interest, for Golenishtchev spoke well. But Vronsky was surprised and annoyed at the irritable excitement under which Golenishtchev labored while talking about the object that absorbed him. The longer he spoke, the brighter grew his eyes, the more animated were his arguments in refutation of imaginary opponents, and the more angry and excited the expression of his face. Vronsky remembered Golenishtchev at the School of Pages, a lad of small stature, thin, nervous, agile, a good-hearted and gentlemanly lad, always at the head of his class, and he could not understand the reasons for such irascibility, and he did not approve of it. And it especially displeased him that Golenishtchev, a man of good social standing, should put himself down on the level of these common scribblers and get angry with them because they criticized him. Was it worth while? It displeased him, but, nevertheless, he felt that it was Golenishtchev who was making himself miserable, and he was sorry for him. This unhappiness, almost amounting to insanity, was particularly noticeable on his mobile and rather handsome face, while he went on so hurriedly and heatedly expressing his thoughts that he did not notice Anna's return. As Anna came in, wearing her hat and with a mantle thrown over her shoulders, and stood near them, twirling her sunshade in her lovely, slender hand, Vronsky felt a sense of relief in turning away from Golenishtchev's feverish eyes fixed keenly on him, and looked with an ever new love at his charming companion, radiant with life and gaiety. It was hard for Golenishtchev to come to himself, and at first he was surly and cross. But Anna, who was flatteringly amiable toward everyone, for such as this time was her disposition, quickly brought him into sympathy with her gay and natural manner. After essaying various topics of conversation, she brought him round to painting, about which he spoke very well, and she listened to him attentively. They walked over to the palazzo and made a thorough inspection of it. "I am very glad of one thing," said Anna to Golenishtchev. "Alexei will have a nice atelier. Of course you'll take this room?" she added, turning to Vronsky and speaking to him in Russian, using the familiar "tu," thou, as if she already looked on Golenishtchev as an intimate, before whom it was not necessary to be reserved. "Do you paint?" said Golenishtchev, turning vivaciously to Vronsky. "Yes, I used to paint long ago, and now I am going to take it up again," replied Vronsky, with color. "He has great talent," cried Anna, with a radiant smile. "Of course I am not a judge, but good judges say so." Anna, during this first period of freedom and rapid convalescence, felt herself inexcusably happy and full of joyous life. The memory of her husband's unhappiness did not poison her pleasure. This memory in one way was too horrible to think of. In another, her husband's unhappiness was the cause of a happiness for her too great to allow regret. The memory of everything that had followed since her sickness, the reconciliation with her husband, the quarrel, Vronsky's wound, his sudden appearance, the preparations for the divorce, the flight from her husband's home, the separation from her son, all this seemed like a delirious dream from which she awoke and found herself abroad alone with Vronsky. The recollection of the injury which she had done to her husband aroused in her a feeling akin to disgust, and like that which a drowning man might experience after having pushed away a person clinging to him. The other person was drowned. Of course, what had been done was evil, but it was the only possible salvation, and it was better not to return to those horrible memories. One consoling argument in regard to her conduct occurred to her at the first moment of the rupture, and now, whenever she thought of all that had passed, she went over this argument. "I have done my husband an irrevocable injury," she said to herself, "but at least I get no advantage from his misfortune. I also suffer and shall suffer. I give up all that was dearest to me. I give up my good name and my son. I have sinned, and therefore I do not desire happiness, do not desire a divorce, and I accept my shame and the separation from my son." But, however sincere Anna was when she reasoned thus, she had not suffered. She had felt no shame. With that tact which both she and Vronsky possessed to perfection, they had avoided, while abroad, any meeting with Russian ladies, and they would never put themselves into any false position, but only associated with those who pretended to understand their situation much better than they themselves did. Nor even the separation from her son, whom she loved, caused her any pain at this time. Her baby, her daughter, was so lovely and had so filled her heart since only the daughter was left to her, that she rarely thought of the son. The joy of living caused by her convalescence was so keen, the conditions of her existence were so new and delightful, that Anna felt inexcusably happy. The more she came to know Vronsky, the more she loved him. She loved him for his own sake, and for his love for her. The complete surrender to him was a delight. His presence was always a joy to her. All the traits of his character, as she came to know them better and better, became to her inexpressibly dear. His appearance, now that he dressed in civil attire instead of uniform, was as entrancing to her as for a young girl desperately in love. In all he said, thought, or did, she saw something noble and elevated. She herself often felt frightened at this excessive worship of him. She tried in vain to find any imperfection in him. She did not dare to confess to him her own inferiority, lest he, knowing it, should love her less. And now there was nothing that she feared so much, although there was not the slightest occasion for it, as to lose his love. But she could not fail to be grateful to him for the way he treated her, or to show him how much she prized it. Although in her opinion he had shown such a decided vocation for statesmanship, in which he would certainly have played an important part, and had sacrificed this ambition for her, still he had never expressed the slightest regret. He was more than ever affectionately respectful, and careful that she should never feel in the slightest degree the compromising character of her position. This man, so masculine, not only never opposed her, but moreover it might be said that he had no will besides hers, and that his only aim seemed to be to anticipate her desires. And she could not but appreciate this, though this very assiduity in his attentions, this atmosphere of solicitude which he threw around her, was sometimes oppressive to her. Vronsky, meantime, notwithstanding the complete realization of all that he had desired so long, was not entirely happy. He soon began to feel that the accomplishment of his desires was only a small portion of the mountain of pleasure which he had anticipated. This realization now proved to him the eternal error made by men who imagine their happiness lies in the accomplishment of their desires. During the first of the time after he had begun to live with her, and had put on his citizen's clothes, he experienced all the charm of a freedom such as he had never known before, and the freedom of love, and he was satisfied with that. But not for long. He soon began to feel rising in his soul the desire of desires, Tosca, melancholy, homesickness, ennui. Involuntarily he began to follow every light caprice as if it were serious aspirations and ends. It was necessary to fill 16 hours each day with some occupation, living, as they did, abroad, in perfect freedom, away from the social and military duties that took Vronsky's time at Petersburg. He could not think of indulging in the pleasures such as he had enjoyed as a bachelor during his previous trips abroad, for one experiment of that kind, a scheme of a late supper with some acquaintances, reduced Anna to a most unexpected and uncomfortable state of dejection. The enjoyment with foreign or Russian society was impossible on account of the peculiarity of their relation. And to amuse himself with the curiosities of the country was not to be spoken of, not only because he had already seen them, but because as a Russian and a man of sense, he could not find in them that immense importance that the English are pleased to attach to them. And as a hungry animal throws itself on everything that presents itself, hoping to find in it something to eat, so Vronsky, with perfect spontaneity, attacked now politics, now new books, now painting. As, when he was young, he had shown some inclination toward art, and not knowing what to do with his money, he began to collect engravings, and had tried his hand at painting. And now he took it up again, and employed in it that expended superfluity of energy which demanded employment. He had the capacity for appreciating art, and he thought that this was all that an artist needed. After having for some time hung doubtful which he would choose, the religious, the historical, genre, or the realistic, he actually began to paint. He understood all kinds, and could get inspiration from each. But he could not imagine that it was possible to be entirely ignorant of the various styles of art, and to draw inspiration directly from what is in the soul itself, not caring what may be the result, or to what famous school it may belong. As he did not know this, he drew his inspiration, not directly from life, but from life as expressed in art. So he became easily and speedily inspired, and with equal ease and rapidity succeeded in making what he undertook to paint a very good resemblance to that style which he was trying to imitate. More than all others, the graceful and effective French school appealed to him, and in this style he began a portrait of Anna in an Italian costume, and this portrait seemed to him and to all that saw it very successful.